Thank you so much. I hope that you have been enjoying the morning session and found it meaningful and had a great lunch. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Sonia Malik. I'm an early math professional learning coordinator. I feel so honored and privileged to share the stage with Allison. She's really has been helping our team, and I've learned tremendously just from her. So I'm so appreciative of this experience. So our purpose for the afternoon portion is to really reflect and reimagine our professional learning systems that we're a part of. And so we're going to dig deep on some of those concepts that Allison mentioned earlier in the morning and have a chance to reflect and reimagine what it could look like to support all learners. So you see the outcomes on the slide. These are the questions that we're going to explore. I'll give you a minute to read on your own. We would love to see who's in the room, and also I want to give this opportunity for you to see who has similar roles as yourself and support the similar group of people as you support, because we will throughout our session give you opportunity to network and have a chance to talk and collaborate with them. And so when I read the statements that apply to you, please stand up and then take a chance and look around to see who else has that similar role as you. So in your professional learning system, if you support students directly, please stand up. If you support teachers directly, please stand up. Big group. Thank you. In your role, if you support content leaders, please stand up. Thank you. And in your role, if you directly support principals, please stand up. And look around. So at times we support multiple different groups of people. And in your role, if you support district leaders, please stand up and look around. Thank you. So many of us are wearing multiple hats.
Okay. There we go. Does it work now? There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. Again, it's so great to be here. We're going to dig much deeper into this thinking tool that I started to engage with earlier. One thing I'm just going to prompt for you is today we're going to be thinking about one group of learners. So it's fascinating and overwhelming how many of you support more than 3 even groups of learners. Just start thinking today about which group of learners you might want to focus in on. And in a moment, we'll start to really zoom in on that. Any of those groups of learners, well, I would pick an adult group of learners for today since we're thinking about professional learning, but just start to think about which group of learners you might want to think most about. Okay. So earlier I talked about how one tool that I find useful for thinking about professional learning systems is starting by thinking about these 4 buckets here. So again, roles are how the different positions people have are enacted. There's a lot of different ways to be an instructional coach. There's a lot of different ways to be a principal. There's a lot of different ways to be a teacher. How those roles are enacted, what responsibilities those people have, the kinds of expectations they have for their roles, the kinds of practice that they engage in is part of a professional learning system that a learner experiences. Another piece is the events. And again, I made the distinction earlier. There's the planned events. This is a planned event. If you came and talked to me at lunch, that was an incidental event that both planned events and incidental events can either support your learning or not. We've all had both, right? And then we have routines, which are the recognizable or repeatable common patterns of interaction. So again, those examples of we always do an exit ticket at the end of a session. Or we always ask these questions when we look at student data. or we always reflect in this way when we reflect after a lesson. Those are examples of routines we have in schools within professional learning systems. There's a lot of other ones, and they're powerful tools. Well, now I'm moving to tools. They're a powerful piece of the system for us to consider. And then we have tools that, again, can be tangible or intangible. Our document of the practices is a tangible tool. How we use those ideas, those then become intangible tools that are part of our system that we can refer back to. So when I talked about how the math task force has been using this idea of thinking traps, we no longer have to hold up the piece of paper we have that defines what a thinking trap is. That idea is something we all share now, and it can be a tool that we refer back to in our work that supports our learning. You may have noticed I said multiple times, these can all support learning or not. It's not that any event is definitely going to support learning or any tool, but these are categories that are helpful to think about. What's also important is that they're not clear-cut categories that are very distinct necessarily, right? Different roles use different tools and use different routines within an event. Routines use tools, right? These are all kind of overlapping. Sometimes people get caught up on, well, is this a tool or a routine? I don't know. Don't get caught up there. It's more about, are we thinking about the full system, or are we only thinking about the professional learning time on Friday mornings? Okay? Again, these things are only effective within a community that has some particular kinds of features. If I don't feel comfortable taking risks and experimenting, I'm not going to try that new idea that you shared with me. That's true if I'm a teacher, a principal, a district leader. If I can't have reflective dialogue with my colleagues, also pretty unlikely I'm going to try something new. Especially, maybe I might try it once, but I'm not going to try it again if it doesn't go well because I don't have anyone to talk about it with. Okay? Shared norms and values. This is, again, where this document can be useful. If we all have the same values that are part of how we think about our work, that can help us learn something new. If we have similar norms about how we interact with each other within our broader community that supports our learning, we're more likely to learn something new and try a different kind of practice. Here's this collective focus on student learning. That can also just be collective focus on learning, whether it be students, teachers, other leaders, yourself. If we're not all focused on our learning and the learning of those who are supporting, we're less likely to change our practice. Trust. If I don't trust my principal, I'm going to be pretty uncertain about how to take on something new in my classroom if I'm not sure they're going to support me with it. If I'm a principal and I don't trust my district leader, that's going to interact with my learning and my experience of the professional learning system. Okay? Deprivatization of practice. This is a trap, actually, that we can't talk to each other about what's not going well in our practice. That's true for teachers, that's true for principals, that's true for content leaders, that's true for district leaders, that's true for superintendents, right? In education, we tend to kind of think we have to show that we have our act together and we know what we're doing and nothing went wrong. What we know is that we're more likely to change our practice if we feel like we can say, hey, I tried this, and I'm not sure if I did that part the way I meant to, or then this kid said that, and I wasn't sure what to do. That helps me, right? Or if I can say to my leader, can you come in and watch me do this so that you can help me think about how to do it better? If I don't feel comfortable deprivatizing my practice, I'm less likely to be able to really take any learning out of any of these supports. Okay, and there's collaboration. All of these, you'll notice, interact with each other. So all of these pieces of the learning system happen within a particular community that we have to think about. And then another really crucial piece that we often forget, and this blue box is lumping a lot of things together, I'll name that. There's a whole context outside of whatever inquiry community we're thinking about that absolutely interacts with what's ever inside a particular building. So a great example, well, there's lots of examples right now, right? Teachers, school leaders are at the forefront of a lot of bigger political and social conversations and issues, right? Book banning is a great example that we're having to deal with right now. COVID was a whole nother thing, right? We also have some other layers of it, like the science of reading. That is part of the context in which I, as a learner, am experiencing anything you tell me in PD or anything you tell me in my evaluation conversation. So if we don't consider that broader context as part of the professional learning system, then we're not considering the full context in which our learners are learning. So let's think about what this means for kids. If we think about the kids' learning system, right? Let's play this out a little bit. Events could be the intentional lessons that my teacher plans for me, or the incidental interactions they have with me that matter a lot for how I'm going to engage over the whole day in my learning, right? That could be a response to a behavior I have. It could be just how they greet me when I walk in the door. Those kinds of things matter for how I engage in learning. How my teacher thinks about their role and how my instructional leaders think about their roles are going to be part of what shapes my learning as a kid. So are the kinds of tools that are around me, right? Are math tools available, or are they hidden away because that's something only kids who really struggle with math use? That's going to matter for how I engage in learning. What does the worksheet I am working with look like? Does it have a ton of space for me to do my work? Or does it have a little bit of space because I'm just supposed to kind of know the answer, right? All of these things send messages that interact with someone's learning. And in routines, we have things like instructional routines, or the routine of, say, a literacy lesson or a phonics activity that kids get used to. We also have classroom routines, which is usually how we think about that word in classrooms, right? Of how do we line up? How do we move to the carpet? All of these things interact in terms of supporting my learning. And it matters what the classroom community is like for how I'm going to engage with any of those events, roles, tools, or routines. And it matters what my community around me is telling me and society is telling me about who I am, what I'm capable of, how I'm supposed to show up in school, what math or reading even is and why I should do it, right? These are all part of how I show up as a learner as a kid. If we only focus on what's the event, right? How do we structure the math lesson? Or how do we give feedback for reading, or for their reading? We're missing a whole bunch of pieces around that are crucial. Let's think about it for teachers. Maybe as a teacher, I have professional learning sessions. I also just run into colleagues in the hallway or run into my principal in the hallway. Those are all events that support my learning or not. How my principal, instructional coach, other facilitators of my learning enact their roles, how they view their roles, what kind of practice they enact, that shapes my learning. The resources I have available. Routines like observation cycles, or maybe a routine for how I co-plan with colleagues. Those are all part of my learning system. And those all happen within my school context. And those all happen within this broader context, right? I am not sitting in a literacy PD totally forgetting about the buzz of science of reading. That is in my head. However I've made sense of Sold a Story is in my head, right? Whatever the parent told me yesterday about their interpretation of Sold a Story is in my head. This is a trap we fall into where we only think about what am I saying in my part of the professional learning, and we're not thinking about how that interacts with everything else that a teacher might be experiencing. So
we're going to give you some time now to think about your context and reflect on the professional learning system that you're a part of. we want you to pick a professional learning system and focus on one set of people that you support. So we saw today earlier that many of you wear multiple hats and support many people that you see on the slide. So take a moment and decide which one you're going to focus on today. Trish passed out a handout that has those components of a professional learning system. And so we're going to take about 5 minutes to reflect on the system that you're part of, that you're focusing on, and draft out events, roles, tools, and routines that are part of your system. So the questions that you see on the slide will help you to reflect and think about your system and what kind of events are taking place, planned and unplanned, what kind of roles are present in your system, and the purpose for those roles, what tools are being used in your system, and the repetitive routines that occur in your system. So we'll give you 5 minutes of just individual time to draft out the professional learning system that you're focusing on.
And if you think better with blank paper, the other side's blank. So if you'd rather flip it over and brain dump there, you totally can. The goal here is just brain dump out what you know about the professional learning system you're focusing on right now. What do you know about it based using this thinking tool here? I had a good clarification question. Dump down what you know about the system right now. We'll dream in a second. We'll reimagine in a second. Dump down what you know about it right now. What events do these learners engage in? What roles do they interact with? What kinds of tools are in the system right now? Are there any routines you can think of? What is the inquiry community like? And what about the district, local, or national context is important to keep in mind?
Okay, we're going to pause on our reflection, and we're going to get a chance to discuss and share our map and discuss with a partner that is supporting a similar type of professional learning system. And so we're going to regroup for a moment to do that sharing. So on the slide, you see the 4 different types of professional learning systems that we're thinking about today. And so on my right, if you support teachers, you're going to go to this corner of the room. If you support principals, you're going to go over there. If you support content leaders, you're going to go on that side. And then district leaders will go on the left of me in that corner. So before you go to your corners, you need to bring your map that you've been reflecting on, something to write with, and find a partner when you get there, and have a conversation around your professional learning system, the events, the roles, routines, and tools that are part of your system. We'll give you a chance to share, and then also some time to add on to your map as well. We'll give you about 5 minutes to do so, and we'll come back together. Let's wrap up and thank our partner, and then you can go back to your seats. If you didn't get a chance, I'll give you a couple of minutes to add on to your map after having a conversation with someone who supports similar groups of people. So I'll give you a couple minutes to add on.
So the benefit of talking to someone else who supports learners, similar learners but in a different system, is it might have jogged your thinking about things you hadn't thought about yet. So here's the questions again, if that's helpful. Is there anything else you would add to your map about what you know about the system right now?
Okay, so now we're going to reflect on what we don't know about our professional learning system that we're a part of. So what don't we know about the professional learning system we're a part of? Do we know what's happening in evaluative conversations? Do you know what's happening in professional learning session led by others in your system? Do you know what tools or resources are being utilized by others? Do you have common terms or definitions being used in other spaces? So what are we questioning about in our professional learning system? What don't we know? So think about those questions and take a moment and jot down those questions on your map. You can actually write out those questions that you have that you don't know of, or you can add question marks. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. So we're going to have 3 people share out some of the things that you don't know about the professional learning system that you're supporting. I know that I already have one group that will share out. Who else would like to share out? I need 2 more people. Okay. You could be you could start off. Go ahead.
We were talking in our team, and I had some curiosity about more definition of my role in order to help teachers feel more trusted and a trust relationship. So I think if I clarify my role of being in a non-judgment, what my role isn't, I think that would be helpful, and it might lead to me having more events like maybe an affirmation visit. So going through the whole group of teachers and just looking for strengths and gathering information about the strengths of the entire body of like instructional strengths.
Thank you. So there might be people in your system that don't understand your role and how you can support them. Thank you for sharing that. How about you guys?
Okay, there we go. So our group really focused on that question, what happens in the other PD sessions within the district. So they were noticing that there are 2 different trainings happening on the same topic, and one is for the general education teachers, and one is for the special education teachers. And they're often hearing different messaging or getting different content or deeper level information with one group than the other. And so then when they come together, knowing that they're both servicing the same groups of students, it just can be a little bit challenging.
Absolutely. Thank you. Can we get one more person to share?
We had just said, is the learning system built to be responsive Or is it already planned out and there's no room for them responsiveness in that system?
That's a great question.
Any other burning questions people wanted to raise? Okay, so we heard 3 really different kinds of examples, right? What don't I know about my role? Or what do others not know about my role? How is the system even planned? What's even happening in those other events that I have no contact with but are part of this system? These are all questions that point to, and what I heard a lot of people surfacing is like, oh, it's all so disconnected. So that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. So here's an example that might resonate, right? If you are a math content leader, you're really focused on your goal of supporting teachers to incorporate more discussion and student sense making into their math instruction, for example. You spend a lot of time focused on that. You are doing a great job at that. You're thinking really hard about what that should look like. Here's the problem. Okay, the same teacher, and we are in, the pre-K 5 space where most teachers teach everything. So I am an elementary teacher. I'm responsible for all of these things. I'm engaged in all these things, not to mention these things, not to mention all of this. This is just a teacher example, right? We could very easily, and maybe some of your maps look like this. We could do the same map for principals. We could do the same map for content leaders. We could do the same map for district leaders, right? And here's the further issue. When we think about what we know about that, it kind of looks like this. And I made them different kinds of gray because maybe we know some of them, maybe some of them are total black boxes. I don't know. My job is math professional development. So this is a challenge. I'm not going to pretend this is like an easy problem to solve. But let's imagine ways that we could start to uncover some of these boxes and think about how they can fit together in our learning systems. So here's my working definition of a coherent professional learning system. This may sound a little dreamy. You may already be like, all right, I guess I might tune out now because that's impossible. But bear with me. We're going to think about like little steps we can take and bigger steps we can take. I promise you're going to leave today with like something you can do to make a tiny step towards a more coherent system, okay? But here's the idea. We need the same goals and vision of my job coming from all of the different things around me. All right, if I'm learning one thing in my math PD and my principal is coming in and saying, that's not the way you teach math, who am I going to listen to? And how am I going to feel next time I have to go to math PD? Right? I hear a lot of yeses because we are all teachers in the same system, right? We felt this, or we are currently feeling this. So that means that over time, we need to think about how all these things go together, right? We need to think about how that's coherent within the community, how it's coherent within the broader context. So here's the thinking tool I'm going to have us play with today. These are 4 questions that I've found it's useful to think about to really dig deeper into coherence. Sometimes when we talk about coherence, we actually just mean kind of surface level stuff. This, in my experience, gets us a little deeper. So let's dig into each of these questions. So the first one is, how do different pieces fit together conceptually? So that means, what are the ideas in the system? We're just thinking about ideas right now. When they use the word equity in my math PD, do they mean the same thing as when they say equity in my equity-focused PD? When my principal uses the word equity, is that the same? When they talk about what good teaching is in all those spaces, is it the same when they talk about what my kids are capable of? Or what I should be doing to interact with families? Is that all the same, or are those all different? That's the conceptual coherence. Are the ideas I experience across the system the same? So that could be, what is equity? What are our goals for our kiddos? What is good teaching even? Or good leadership? Okay. The next question is, how do they fit together structurally? So this is about, how are they organized in relation to each other? So are there common features? Are there common experiences, routines, tools, practices across the system? So at one of the schools I taught at, we had the same set of professional norms and learning norms that we used regardless of which PD facilitator was working with us. That's an example of a common tool and a common routine we used with that tool, no matter which leader was working with us, right? That's an example of how it can be structurally coherent. Another way is just, do the learners even have time to do all the things in the system, right? That's another piece of considering structural coherence. Here's one I think is really powerful. How is coherence crafted over time? So we often think about coherence as, okay, did we plan for coherence? Check, we're done with coherence. Right? Did all the documents have the same word on them? Check, we're done with coherence. Instead, let's think about how we are crafting it over time. And there's two different ends of crafting. One is, how am I intentionally planning for it? Right? So I can intentionally plan for all of the leaders in my building to use the same definition of equity. That's an intentional planning. I can plan for that to show up in every professional learning experience over the whole school year. I'm intentionally planning and crafting for coherence. But we also have to notice and respond to the unanticipated moments that happen every single day in every single interaction, right? We have to notice, oh, this is making me remember that other conversation we had 2 weeks ago. I'm going to help this person connect to it. That's the other way we craft coherence. So it's both in the intentional planning and in our responding to unanticipated moments in ways that pull together threads for our learners. And that leads us to the last question. Coherence is in the eyes of the learner, so to speak. Often we're like, we planned for coherence, so we must have coherence. It doesn't actually matter if the learner isn't experiencing it as coherence. So where do our learners see the connections? And what disconnects or contradictions are they noticing that are getting in the way of their learning? That's the question we need to be asking, not, did I plan for coherence, but how are they picking up on or not? How are they making sense of or not the coherence I'm trying to plan for? So, let's use this as a reflective lens. Let's take a minute or two to do independent think time, and then we can jump in. What does this make you see about your system? And when you discuss with your partner, you might share, this might jog like new ideas you have, questions you have, challenges you have, incoherences you're seeing. We'll take a moment to think, and then you can chat with the folks at your table. Oh no, we're gonna do a new partner. Is that what we're gonna do? Okay. Sorry, Sonia. I totally did that correct.
Clinton County ISD was having a great conversation about coherence. Give them the mic.
So we discussed working at an ISD with 6 different districts, that it's about impossible to adopt and become familiar with all of the professional learning system practices within our different county or different districts. So we thought, why not, as an instructional services department, create some of our own protocols and our own routines that we can adapt. So anytime there's an ISD professional development opportunity, our locals can feel familiar and comfortable with these effective protocols and practices that we have in place, at least from the instructional services department.
Thank you. So it can seem really overwhelming to know all parts of our professional learning system, but they found ways to do so in small ways. Is there anybody else who would like to share?
I'll share. I said this back in the fall when we were at Adult Learning Principles, but I'm going to say it again. I just really appreciate that you live out what you're doing. So the coherence that you're providing to us for math and literacy, you at this level up here are showing us and modeling to us what we want to take back. And I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate that, because if you don't do what you say that you think we should do, then I won't listen to you. So, but it is something, and it is a model that we should be modeling then to those that we have the privilege to share with back at home. So again, to all of you, I thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate that. We're also on a journey together as well and learning alongside Allison and you all.
I am learning very much. Well, I think what's important that you just called out is another layer of it, that our words and our actions have to match, right? Our learners are paying attention to both, okay? We don't have it all figured out. We are actively trying to figure out how do you create a coherent learning system across the state in relation to the essential practices. That's a whole new level of a challenge, right? But we are attempting to model it, so I'm glad it's coming through. Anyone else want to share what they were thinking about with their system?
I actually just have a question. So it brought to mind in our conversation, at my kids' school, they have this like compass star, and there's 6 C's on it, like communication, collaboration, critical thinking. And I have to think that something like that in everything that we do, like, okay, we might be sitting in math PD or we might be sitting in equity PD, or your kids might be off to welding class or they might be off to, something else. But whatever we do here in this school, we're focused on kids building these skills of communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and so on. And I just wondered if that's the kind of tool you're talking about that can help us bring together.
That's a beautiful example. Yeah. So again, we tend to think as the way a teacher can experience it, or a principal, right? Just with the math essentials and the literacy essentials, they can think that's a whole new thing I have to learn over here and a whole new thing I have to learn over here. Or we can find a tool that captures some core ideas about who kids are as learners and what we're trying to support them to be as learners and what the role of the teacher is in supporting that learning, that stretches across both. They can be an anchor or a compass, right? That can help us see it as a coherent whole that we're working towards. It can serve as a thread, right? That's kind of one way I like to think about is what are the threads that we're using to attach these different pieces. That's a really nice example of a tool, yeah. And then it's what routines are we building around the tool, right? So you named a routine of always having it be something you reflect on in any experience. Anyone else? Okay. That's a perfect pivot into this next piece where we're going to start imagining. Here's what I'm sure you ran up against and maybe even said out loud. We run into this, okay, but the system is just not coherent. And I don't have control or access to all parts of it. Like, what am I supposed to do, right? In this example over here, we work with 6 different districts. How are we supposed to know what's happening in all 6 districts, right? We don't have any control over what those 6 districts do. What I want to help you think about, and we're going to dig deeper into this, is there's a whole spectrum of ways to try to create coherence or craft coherence. It can be starting from scratch, so to speak, and trying to craft something that's new and aligned in all the different ways. It can be that you just try to craft coherence around one part of the system. That's kind of what you were starting to talk about over here, right? How do we at least make sure that the touch points they have with this part of the system all feel coherent? It can also just be supporting different roles to even understand what's happening in another space. That can be a great place to start. It can also just be noticing the contradictions and trying to help people make sense of them. If that's the only thing if you can't control that the contradiction is there, that's not in your power, you can at least help your learners make sense of it, right? My principal came in and said that I was doing this wrong. Oh, that is really different than what we've been talking about. Even just naming it to that learner is going to help them make sense of the incoherence, right? In a way that's different than if we're all just kind of quiet about it. So that's the broad spectrum of ways that we can think about, but let's dive into, I'm going to talk about 5 different strategies that I've seen leaders use. For each of these, I'm going to give you some concrete examples. But go ahead and if you get an idea for your system, jot it down. Don't lose track of it. So the first one is connecting comments. So this is a small scale thing. This is noticing moments or planning for moments where in 30 seconds, a minute, you can make a connection for people. Okay? So an example I've seen of this is maybe in an all-staff PD or a district-level PD where they're doing some work on reading a book about equity-oriented instruction that's kind of content neutral, right? Then in a literacy PD, I've seen the facilitator say, I know you're all reading that book, and this reminds me of the idea from that book. That's it. Just there, I've put a little thread across, right? I've attached just a little bit. Great. Or maybe when I run into a learner in the hallway, I say something about something that happened across multiple experiences or in an experience that just connects it to my hallway conversation. I'm noticing moments to craft coherence for people and just saying something quickly. And these can be planned ahead of time. I know leaders who, as they're planning a PD, they stop and say, where can I make a connecting comment to something else? It can also be if you have an evaluative role, thinking about how you're going to make a connecting comment to say, you know what, I know in coming weeks your literacy facilitator is going to be working on this. This connects to your goal that we just talked about in your evaluative conversation. That's a thread I've just made in one quick comment, right? So if you have any ideas about places connecting comments might be interesting to think about, go ahead and jot that down on your map or somewhere else. This is one little thing we can do to support our learners. This can also be where that recognizing incoherence can come in too, right? So maybe it's a not connecting comment. I don't know what we would call that, but saying, I realize this is maybe different than you heard over there is another example of a connecting comment. We heard an example of common tools just now. Develop a common tool that you use across the system. So you have that memory mat from the math folks. That's a tool we made to capture some key ideas that we want to really build within the math task force. that we bring up in any meeting we have, in any professional learning we have. We always bring that tool forward in our group, right? That's a small scale example. You can also think about, is there a tool from another part of the system that I could use that already exists that I could bring in? So an example, I saw a literacy coach who was going to be working on conferring with kids. She realized that they were using an interesting tool for conferring with kids about math that could actually be an interesting tool to bring into the literacy space. She just brought that tool right around, right? You can also use, say, if there's a reading, use a paragraph from a reading that someone engaged in more thoroughly in another learning space in your learning space. Bring a common physical tool to different spaces. If you have ideas, definitely jot them down. This is the reimagine time. If you have a little more time, you can also build in time for connections. This is a nice one when there's terms that we use across multiple spaces that are the same, for instance. So, you've been working in discussions in literacy and discussions in math. Let's take 15 minutes to think about, what do we notice is the same? What do we notice is different? What questions do we have? Or take 10 minutes during something to talk about, how does this connect to your evaluation framework? Right? Or again, dig more deeply into a part of another professional learning experience that you bring into yours. Here's another way in. Find a colleague who also works with the same learners, but you don't really talk to very much, at least about what they're doing with those learners. Have lunch together, talk about what you're working on. See if there's points of connection. That's a great first step. Are there any areas that might be confusing for people? What words are they using? Do we use any of the same words? I'm trying to work on this idea with teachers. Have you worked on that before? Right? You can also, it's a heavier lift, but you can also start having regular meetings with those leaders and thinking about, let's look together at the next 6 weeks that these learners are experiencing and make sure we all understand the full system that these learners are experiencing. Again, a bigger lift, you might be looking at me like I am dreaming and don't understand your context. We're just imagining here. Again, any ideas? Jot them down. Another way in is just to try to understand more. So, see if you can go to another professional learning session that your learners are engaging in. Just see if you can go. Just see what it's like. And imagine from your learner's perspective what it's like to sit in your session or your experience and this experience. The second example is imagining if you work with principals. Ask them, what's incoherent about your experience? What doesn't make sense to you? Where are we confusing you by not talking to each other? Or you can just try to gather materials that your learners have access to across the system and just look at the materials and say, where are the points of disconnect? Where are the points where people might see incoherence? Or where are the opportunities for me to create more coherence and build off of these different things? So again, lots of different entry points. Hopefully you're seeing one or two that seem like initial places you could dive in. Make sure you jot down any ideas you're having. Okay. We're going to give you some time now to chat at your tables and flesh some ideas out. And let's see if in the next few minutes, as you discuss with your tables, you can really land on what's one or two small things you want to commit to trying. One or two small steps you feel like, yeah, I could do that. And it would just inch closer to having some more coherence in my professional learning system. Go ahead and chat at your tables. I would love to put into the bigger room some ideas you're excited about. There were some really nice ideas of all different scales that people were throwing out. Does anyone feel willing to share?
Thanks. One of the things that we were talking about, I was referencing, for lack of a better word, the map that you put up at the beginning that had all the things that teachers juggle in relation to PD, because we were saying it still doesn't include parent communication, things like that, but how honoring for them that we recognize that you are, taking on all of these pieces and then asking them to chart what connections did you make today and where weren't there connections. It would be incredible feedback for us as the facilitators of PD, and it also demonstrates to them intentionality with connection and such worth over you juggle a ton.
We were talking at our table and I shared how our ISD has really been focusing on the use of the adult learning principles and facilitating professional learning. We've had years of adaptive schools training for our leaders, and currently I'm working on a project with another ISD to bring in a researcher for different sessions for writing, and it just made me think, wow, maybe I need to be emulating what you are doing here, where you are still incorporating those adult learning principles in this big session. Even though I don't know what the outside ISDs are doing, at least would have that coherence for our participants.
That's such a good example of thinking about matching our words with our actions. How many times do we have PDs say you have to tell your kids less and let them do the thinking, and we are telling them to do that? Okay? Same with principals. You need to get your teachers to tell less. Let me tell you how to do that. Okay, so I absolutely find it an important part of my own crafting of coherence to think about how am I making sure how I am engaging my learners is coherent with the ideas I'm telling them about or engaging them in thinking about. That's a really important layer of coherence. Any other ideas folks wanted to throw out there? Okay. Sonia, do you want to?
Yeah. Could you pull up the slides?
Yeah.
All right, so let's go back to our organizational practices, specifically number 4. Where do you see ideas of coherence in practice 4? So like we did earlier today, feel free to mark up your document or add Post-it notes where you see the ideas of coherence. It might be explicit or implicit. when you're done looking at practice 4, look at another practice. Pick another organizational practice and see where the ideas of coherent are present, either implicitly or explicitly. So at your table, we're going to give you a chance to do a quick round robin share around one of those questions that you see on the slide. Where do you see the ideas of coherence present in practice 4 or any other practice in this document? Feel free to join a table if you don't have enough people.
I wish that we had time to share ideas from every single table, because I've heard a new idea of something you could do at every single table. Even if all you're walking away with is a hopefully not too depressing sense of how incoherent your system is, I want you to know that that in itself is important learning, right? The first step is seeing it. Hopefully you're not too sad about it. Seeing it is the first step. And even if it's, I heard examples of realizations of places where it could actually be pretty easy to create coherence, and we never thought about it before, because again, that's not the way that our systems have supported us to think or work. So it's the system around you that's creating it, and what we now can do is be imaginative about the ways we can start to even just create little teeny stitches to start weaving things together. I want to name some more meta things, though. I want you to notice the coherence is mentioned in one of the bullets in practice 4, right? I want you to notice, though, how did you read that bullet differently or the whole practice differently after engaging more robustly with others in making sense of the idea of coherence? Just notice. Be a little metacognitive for a second. Notice for yourself how that felt different or how you read it differently. Hopefully that illustrates to you the importance of, as you work with your teams back in your context on making sense of the practices, that it's important to step away from the document too and say, let's just make sense of some of these ideas and then let's go back to the document. That some of the learning needs to happen with the document over here and then you come back to it, right? And hopefully you also saw how intertwined all the practices are. I think if you open any of the practices, you can see some connection to coherence, whether it's that the leadership team needs to have a vision that they're using to guide how they design everything, or that the leadership team should have people from across the system, right? There's lots of ways in which we have to think about the coherence in terms of even assessment. If the practices around assessment or intervention aren't coherent with what we're telling teachers they need to believe about kids, that's another point of incoherence, right? So hopefully you're seeing how these are all intertwined and how there's a lot to unpack even in one single bullet that can help you understand the full thing more deeply.
So we want to know what one idea that you have that you're really excited about, or what question that you still might have after today. So we'd like for you to go to menti.com. You can use your phone or a laptop and enter the code that you see on the screen. What's an idea that you're excited about? And what's one question that you might have? So many of you have next steps, actionable steps that you can take. Appreciative of having leaders who believe in this work. The idea of coherence. Building in time for connections. supporting leadership colleagues, and just shadowing or attending other professional learning sessions. I know. We hope that you found this session to be meaningful. Thank you again to Allison for sharing her expertise.